think who I voted for would be the best to take care of Trump. Because Trump is, I'm sorry to say, an ass. And he shouldn't even be president of the United States. But because he is, we need a strong person so that we could stand strong.
Check this out. The Canadian government has now placed billboards in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, slamming Donald Trump for his tariffs. Here's an example of one of the billboards that says tariffs are a tax on your grocery bill. And here's a zoomed in version of that photo. And as
I've been putting off filming this video for the longest time because I really didn't want it to come to this, but I won't be able to be selling to the US anymore and I am heartbroken. The US is our main market, but with this current tariff situation, I won't be able to sell our products anymore. I'm not somebody who's gonna charge $200 for a tote bag, and it just seems so unfair. It's just me and my husband are doing the quality control, we're doing the marketing, we're doing the designing of the items, we're doing everything by ourselves. The customer service, we're not a dropshipping brand. We don't have any investors, we don't have a warehouse full of items that were $3 a unit. We're just trying to build something that feels good, that can help people live their everyday life, that can function. This brand started as an idea. We just wanted to create a product that felt like you, something that could help everybody, that you could take to the library, to school, to therapy, to a solo cafe day. And now I might lose the community that made this brand what it is today. I'm scared.
War is officially on, so if you're Canadian, now more than ever is it so important to be shopping Canadian products. I'm heading to the grocery store now. I'm going to put together a list of all the products that are either made in Canada or products of Canada, so it's easier for you to do your next grocery shop. When shopping for produce, these are the labels that you want to be looking out for. Let's go to the bakery section. Dempster's is a Canadian brand. BC and No Name Products are both Canadian. Luckily, we have great Ontario dairies, so shopping for cheeses, milks, anything dairy related shouldn't be a problem.
Sorry, we no longer accept US currency. That's a sign from a Canadian grocery store. The Buy Canada movement is trending in Canadian grocery stores due to Trump's trade wars. Some US companies are even stating that Canadian retailers are shunning their products. US-based diaper company Paracel Co. was actually in the middle of a deal with a Canadian retailer, and the retailer ended up halting on the deal because of growing anti-American sentiment in Canada. We're instructed by a retailer to pause any American brand launch. When it comes to liquor, you'll see a lot of signs here that say Buy Canadian instead. I'm Canadian. This was just a small section of the liquor store today. It was tarped off. American farm products are decaying too in stores. The world is not buying anything American. We love Americans. We've always had your back. It sucks to hurt you back because of one guy.
Sorry, we no longer accept US currency. Did you hear that? That's a grocery store sign. And liquor stores literally tarping off American products with Buy Canadian instead signs. This isn't just about economic policy anymore. It's about the sentiment. Growing anti-American sentiment in Canada, he says. They halted a diaper deal because of it. This is what happens when you treat your closest allies like adversaries. It pushes them away. It forces them to protect their own, and it creates a direct, tangible backlash that hurts American businesses and workers. It sucks to hurt you back because of one guy. That's the real kicker, isn't it? One guy and his misguided policies are causing this. Alright, so it's not just Canada feeling the burn and fighting back. Let's head across the pond and see what our European friends think about all this. Spoiler, they're not exactly sending love letters. Take a look.
I'm sure the rest of the world is bowing down to the US. What about you, France? Voulez-vous coucher respect-moi? C'est toi?
In France, Emmanuel Macron called the tariffs brutal and unfounded.
A town in France has replaced Coca-Cola with apple juice at municipal events.
A boycott of Coca-Cola.
We need to punish Mr. Trump a little bit.
They will content themselves with the Statue of Liberty on the Quai de Seine in Paris. These French people will not set foot in the United States as long as Donald Trump is in power.
I don't want to. Although I love America and I've been before, but this time, that's a no.
Hold on. France had a second Statue of Liberty on the side this whole time?
Voulez-vous coucher respect-moi ce soir? Hilarious. But seriously, brutal and unfounded tariffs, replacing Coca-Cola with apple juice, boycotting US brands, this is a clear, unambiguous rejection of these policies and, by extension, the administration behind them. And the part about not setting foot in the US as long as Trump is in power, that's a serious hit to tourism, a huge part of the American economy. These aren't just angry words. These are actions with economic consequences. They're saying, we love America, but we won't stand stand for this. It's a sad reality that a relationship built over decades can be so damaged in such a short amount of time. And the boycott movement in Europe isn't just talk. They've developed tools to actively avoid American products. This isn't just about feeling, it's about strategy, and it's working.
So
before you would have come in and you would have taken these chips?
I used to take this one, but now, well, I took this one.
Across Europe, a quiet protest is playing out in supermarket aisles. American products left untouched. The hashtag Boycott Trump is gaining traction as Facebook groups rally Europeans to push back against US policies with their wallets. Michel joined a French group in March.
As long as we had aggressive policy of American administration, we want to make pressure to say, stop it.
His group even provides an app called De-Trumpify Yourself.
An app called De-Trumpify Yourself? You guys, that's next level. They're not just complaining. They're actively developing tech to help consumers avoid American products. That's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? It shows the depth of the frustration and the commitment to push back. This isn't a fleeting trend. This is a systematic, organized effort to hit where it hurts, the wallets of American corporations, and by extension, the American economy. It's an effective way for ordinary people to express their political dissatisfaction through their purchasing power, and they're not stopping there. They're making sure they really know what they're avoiding.
That lets consumers know if a company's funding traces back to the United States.
Fanta, I wonder if it is. So we just use the app and it says, yes, it's
American.
So
you
American.
put it back.
Well, we'll try with that. We look like
This is a very French brand.
Very French, but sometimes we have surprised. Yes.
Good,
so
we can buy it.
Okay.
But sometimes you get surprises because you find that a company that you thought was French has in fact been bought by an American group, and that's the point of the app.
Exactly.
One recent survey in France found that 6 out of 10 people support consumer boycotts of US goods.
So the app isn't just about direct American brands, but even brands that might look French but are owned by American companies. That's a deep dive into corporate structures, folks. This is targeted, informed consumer action. And a survey showing 6 out of 10 people supporting boycotts, that's not a fringe movement, that's mainstream. That's a huge portion of the population actively choosing not to buy American. This strategy is far more impactful than just angry tweets. It shows how profoundly policies can impact consumer behavior globally, reshaping markets and hurting American businesses. And it's not just about products, it's about people. European travel to the US is down, and there's a growing fear about visiting. This is the human cost, folks.
It's changed the way we travel. It's changed the way we consume. There's hesitation and fear about going to the United States.
So Guylaine, who asks us not to use her last name as she has family in the United States, joined a small group of American protesters on Thursday.
Just here in Paris, there have been 3 anti-Trump protests in as many weeks, including this one, at the heart of what is a traditional day of demonstration here in Paris, the May Day protest, with a decidedly American feel.
Hesitation and fear about going to the United States. That's genuinely sad. Travel and cultural exchange are so important for fostering understanding and good relations. But when policies and rhetoric create such a negative image, people get scared or simply choose to go elsewhere. And anti-Trump protests in Paris? American expats joining with European allies to protest? This is a clear sign that the damage isn't just economic, it's reputational, it's diplomatic, and it's impacting how the world views America and Americans. It's a direct consequence of alienating our allies. What about the people who supported these policies, or at least the person behind them? What about those who swore allegiance to Trump? Let's see what happens when the very policies they cheered for start hitting their pocket. This is where it gets spicy.
Yeah, I'm voting for Trump. Trump has put his tariffs all over the place. I've been trying to understand him. I don't, and everything's in this because of it. Donald Trump just cost me $20 million or whatever he did. Maybe don't be on the golf course.
Everyone in this room, everyone loves you. And I just want to say you're a true hero for this country. I don't know how many of you guys are invested in crypto or stocks. What the is going on with our country? Guys, why am I poor?
Because Donald Trump is the nominee against Joe Biden, I won't just vote for him, I will walk over broken glass to vote for him. His giant tariff policy that he just dropped on the market unilaterally, probably unconstitutionally.
This is a vivid demonstration of very well-known, prominent Trump fans, whether they're in your feeds, as they say, or not, going through their own personal experience of the harm of these Trump economic policies, as their viewers Watch.
What the going on with our country? Guys, why am I poor? That's the sound of the chickens coming home to roost, isn't it? The same people who blindly supported Trump's policies, including tariffs, are now realizing they're personally affected. And Ben Shapiro still pledging to walk over broken glass to vote for him, while simultaneously acknowledging that his giant tariff policy, probably unconstitutionally dropped on the market, is causing harm. The cognitive dissonance is astounding. It's hilarious, really. They cheered for policies that hurt their neighbors, and now they're realizing those policies hurt them too. This isn't just some abstract political debate. It's watching self-proclaimed loyalists grapple with the consequences of their choices when it impacts their own bottom line. The narrator sums it up perfectly, going through their own personal experience of the harm of these Trump economic policies. It's delicious to watch, and finally, to understand where all this stems from, let's go right to the source, the architect of these policies, announcing them himself. This is the root of the problem.
Donald Trump just announced a 50% tariff on goods coming from Europe. This came in a Truth Social post, so let's break it down. In it, he says, the European Union, which was formed for the primary purpose of taking advantage of the United States on trade, has been very difficult to deal with. Their powerful trade barriers, VAT taxes, and ridiculous corporate penalties, non-monetary trade barriers, monetary manipulations, unfair and unjustified lawsuits against American companies, and more have led to a trade deficit with the U.S. of more than $250 million a year, a number which is totally unacceptable. Our discussions with them are going nowhere, therefore I am recommending a straight 50% tariff on the European Union starting June 1st, 2025. There is no tariff if the product is built or manufactured in the United States. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Primary purpose of taking advantage of the United States on trade. Unacceptable. Discussions going nowhere. And bam, straight 50% tariff. This is the rhetoric and the policy in action. This is the mindset that led to everything we just saw. The heartbroken small business owner, the Buy Canadian movement, the European boycotts, and even his own supporters crying poor. It's a protectionist, isolationist approach that views trade as a zero-sum game, where every other country is trying to take advantage of the US. This is not how modern international trade works, and it inevitably leads to retaliation and widespread negative consequences. It's a policy based on a misunderstanding of how the global economy operates, and it costs everyone. And here's the kicker, the part that so many people miss. He talks about making products in the US, but it's not that simple. And who actually pays for it?
This came mere hours after Donald Trump threatened Apple, yes, Apple themselves, with a 25% tariff so they can make their products here in the United States. As a reminder, it's not Apple who will pay all this, it's you and I as a consumer. The same thing when it comes to things brought in from the European Union. And let's also remember that even putting these tariffs and things onto us, it doesn't really help us bring manufacturing here because it would take 5 to 7 years to build these factories. So ultimately, besides now that big beautiful bill and this, we're in for a world of hurt. That's if he doesn't actually decide not to do this, because, I mean, he is known to do that. Well, let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Please do share and post my videos and follow me for more.
That's it. He hit the nail on the head. It's not Apple who will pay all this. It's you and I as a consumer. This is the crucial point that Trump and his supporters consistently fail to grasp or intentionally mislead people about. Tariffs are taxes, and they're paid by the importer, which means they're passed on to American consumers in the form of higher prices. So when he says he's punishing other countries, he's actually punishing American families and American businesses that rely on imported goods. It's a hidden tax on everyone. And the idea that these tariffs will magically bring manufacturing back overnight, he just admitted it. It would take 5 to 7 years to build these factories. That's not a quick fix. That's a decade-long plan. And in the meantime, American consumers are footing the bill for a policy that offers no immediate benefit. It's economic illiteracy masquerading as strong-arm tactics. The global supply chain is complex, and you can't just undo decades of globalization with a single tweet or a 50% tariff. It just creates chaos, instability, and a world of hurt, as he put it. So, what have we learned from watching these clips? We've seen a direct line from the rhetoric of America first and punitive tariffs to tangible negative consequences across the globe and even within the United States itself. First, these tariffs directly hurt American businesses and consumers. The small tote bag business owner, heartbroken and struggling, is a perfect example. She's not a giant corporation. She's part of the backbone of the American economy. When tariffs hit her, she can't just absorb the cost without drastically increasing prices, making her products uncompetitive. This isn't helping American businesses. It's crushing them, especially the small ones. And who pays the higher prices? You guessed it, us, the consumers. consumers. The idea that foreign countries pay the tariffs is a fundamental misunderstanding of how trade works. It's an internal tax on Americans. Second, these policies alienate our allies and foster anti-American sentiment. We saw it clearly with Canada's Buy Canadian movement, from grocery store signs refusing US currency to liquor stores literally tarping off American products. This isn't just economic, it's a deep cultural and political backlash. When you treat your friends like enemies, they will respond by protecting their own interests, and that often means turning away from American products and even American travel. The French boycotting Coca-Cola, replacing it with apple juice, and developing an app to de-Trumpify yourself from American-owned brands. That's a level of organized resistance that should alarm anyone who cares about America's standing in the world. Our reputation is taking a massive hit, and that has long-term consequences far beyond any tariff revenue. Third, the impact of these tariffs is felt by everyone, even those who initially cheer them on. The clips of Trump supporters, from the crypto influencer losing millions to the Ben Shapiro listener still pledging allegiance while acknowledging the unconstitutional and harmful nature of the tariffs, highlight a delicious irony. The very policies they champion are now directly impacting their own financial well-being. It exposes the short-sightedness and hypocrisy of supporting policies based on ideology rather than sound economic principles. It's easy to chant USA, USA when you think someone else is paying. It's a different story when it's your own wallet feeling the pinch. And finally, the justification for these tariffs, as laid out in Trump's own Truth Social post, is based on a flawed understanding of global trade. The idea that other countries are simply taking advantage of the US, ignoring the complexities of global supply chains and comparative advantages, leads to punitive and counterproductive policies. Threatening Apple with tariffs to force manufacturing back to the US is a perfect example of this. It's a simplistic view that ignores the years it takes to build infrastructure and the fact that the cost will ultimately fall on American consumers. So, when Canadians say what they think about Trump, it's not just a polite disagreement. It's a visible, organized, and economically impactful movement to protect their own. And when we see the reactions of Trump supporters to the very tariffs he imposes, it truly does say it all. These policies are not making America great. They are isolating us, hurting our businesses, and making life more expensive for everyday Americans. It's a chaotic, self-inflicted wound on the American economy and its global standing. All right, that's it for this one, folks. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you experienced the impact of these tariffs?
In a jaw-dropping press conference moment that shocked both nations, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt dropped this bombshell.
Well, the president is, again, responding to the fact that Canada has been ripping off the United States of America and hardworking Americans for decades. If you look at the rates of tariffs across the board that Canadians have been imposing on the American people and our workers here, it is egregious.
This ignited the biggest trade war in North American history. Canada's response? Absolutely devastating. Billions in retaliation, massive surcharges, even threats that could affect everyday American homes. The friendly neighbor to the north had become an economic adversary overnight, and the fallout is something no one could have predicted. What went wrong and how did we get here? Let's get into the details. The spark that ignited the trade war. In the frigid political landscape of 2025, Canada found itself thrust into the center of a diplomatic maelstrom when Caroline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in American history, made a series of incendiary claims that reverberated across the nation's political landscape like a thunderclap in the night. The saga began on January 29, 2025, when the 27-year-old press secretary made her debut at the podium, her steely demeanor and unflinching delivery marking a new era in White House communications. Yet beneath the seemingly routine briefing lay the seeds of controversy that would blossom into a full-blown trade war. The Trump administration's plans for 25% tariffs on Canada, set to take effect on February 1, 2025, would have been controversial enough on their own, but it was Leavitt's unwavering defense of these measures, delivered with a combative confidence that many found off-putting, that truly set Canadian political circles ablaze with indignation. The public discourse took a decidedly hostile turn during what would become one of the most infamous exchanges in recent press briefing history.
I think many of us probably grew up in small towns. I know at least I did, and the main street in my small town looks a heck of a lot worse than it probably did decades ago before I was alive. At least my parents and grandparents tell me so, and I know many Americans feel that same way.
This nostalgic appeal to American heartland values, while resonating with domestic audiences, struck many Canadians as patronizing and dismissive of the complex economic realities at play. Tariffs are a tax hike on foreign countries that have been ripping us off, Levitt proclaimed during a heated exchange with Associated Press reporter Josh Buck on March 11, 2025. Her assertion that tariffs acted as tax cuts for the American people flew in the face of established economic theory, with economists across the political spectrum pointing out that tariffs typically increase consumer prices and act as a tax on importers and ultimately consumers themselves. The brazen confidence with which she delivered these claims, coupled with her dismissive attitude toward expert opinion, would become a hallmark of her tumultuous tenure. The economic arguments masked deeper political motivations. According to Levitt's briefing, the tariffs were intended to address trade deficits and border security concerns, including illegal immigration and drug trafficking. The statistics she brandished were stark. The U.S. trade deficit with Canada had grown from $31 billion in 2019 to $72 billion in 2023, largely due to energy imports, a detail that would later come back to haunt American consumers when Canadian electricity began flowing at premium prices. This conflation of economic and security issues created a dangerous narrative that would poison bilateral relations for months to come. The cultural flashpoint arrived during what should have been a moment of North American sporting unity, the U.S.-Canada hockey game in February 2025. With cameras rolling and tensions already high, Levitt made what many considered the most inflammatory statement of the crisis to date.
So he looks forward to watching the game tonight, and we look forward to the United States beating our soon-to-be 51st state, Canada. Bloomberg, go ahead.
This comment, delivered with what critics called characteristic smugness, would prove to be the match that set off a political powder keg. The casual reference to Canada as a soon-to-be 51st state wasn't just insensitive, it was perceived as a direct threat to Canadian sovereignty, the likes of which hadn't been seen since the 19th century. In the days leading up to the game, Levitt doubled down on her rhetoric.
Does President Trump have a bet with Trudeau about this USA-Canada hockey game tonight? And when there is a big hockey game on, is the president watching for the goals or for the fights?
Probably both. I think he's watching for the United States to win tonight. I know he talked to the USA hockey team this morning.
The aggressive promotion of American victory, framed within the context of political tensions, transformed a friendly sporting rivalry into a proxy battle for national dignity. The cultural insensitivity of these remarks cannot be overstated. Canada, a nation that has fought fiercely to maintain its distinct identity in the shadow of its southern neighbor, reacted with a fury that surprised even veteran political observers. The hockey reference was particularly galling. In a nation where hockey is more than a sport, it's a cornerstone of national identity. Levitt's comments echoed through Canadian social media like a rallying cry, with public sentiment analysis showing 85% negative response to U.S. tariffs. Hashtags like #not the 51 SETI state and #Canada First trended for weeks, becoming symbols of national resistance. As the video clips circulated and tensions escalated exponentially, Levitt doubled down on her stance with characteristic inflexibility. When pressed about the potential economic consequences during subsequent briefings, she painted an increasingly unrealistic picture of American manufacturing revival that seemed divorced from the complex realities of integrated North American supply chains.
What the president envisions for this country is for the United States of America to be a manufacturing superpower, where there are American factories and businesses owned by Americans, producing goods that we are exporting to the rest of the world. Those revenues will stay here. It will increase wages for people here in our great country.
This idealistic vision, while appealing to Trump's base, ignored the intricate web of supply chains that had evolved over decades of careful negotiation and economic integration. The press conferences became increasingly combative as journalists pressed for specifics.
Egregious and insulting are your words here, but that's what many Canadian leaders have said about the actions President Trump has taken toward Canada. And what do you think the timeline is for speaking to Mr. Carney? Because normally a sitting president speaks to a close ally very quickly when there's new leadership.
Levitt's responses grew more defensive.
Well, the president is, again, responding to the fact that Canada has been ripping off the United States of America and hardworking Americans for decades. If you look at the rates of tariffs across the board that Canadians have been imposing on the American people and our workers here, it is egregious.
The economic rhetoric became increasingly inflammatory as Levitt began brandishing charts and statistics with theatrical flair.
If you look at Canada, since you brought it up, American cheese and butter, nearly 300% tariff. You look at India, 150% tariff on American alcohol. You think that's helping Kentucky bourbon be exported into India? I don't think so.
The cherry-picked examples served to inflame rather than enlighten, creating a narrative of victimhood that resonated deeply with administration supporters while further alienating Canadian officials. The stage was set for an unprecedented diplomatic confrontation as February 1st, 2025 approached with grim inevitability. Canadian officials watched with growing alarm as Leavitt's rhetoric escalated. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, still reeling from his own political challenges, found himself thrust into the unfamiliar role of national defender. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, typically known for his moderate stance on U.S. relations, began to hint at retaliation measures that would shake the foundations of North American energy cooperation to their core. Meanwhile, the economic machinery of both nations braced for impact with a sense of foreboding. The Bank of Canada prepared increasingly dire models showing potential GDP declines of 2.5 percentage points in the first year under a full tariff regime. American manufacturers with Canadian supply chain dependencies began their own internal assessments, many concluding that the net effect would be devastation rather than the promised revitalization. The disconnect between Leavitt's confident assertions and the growing panic in corporate boardrooms across America became increasingly stark. As tension reached a fever pitch, Trudeau addressed Leavitt's escalating comments directly in a rare public intervention.
I don't think so. I think the president is going to implement those tariffs tomorrow, and he will respond to Mr. Trudeau's comments in due time, I am sure.
The Canadian Prime Minister's measured but firm response highlighted the growing chasm between diplomatic protocol and the inflammatory rhetoric emanating from the White House press room. Economists on both sides of the border warned of cascading effects that could ripple through global markets, while political commentators speculated about the long-term damage to a relationship that had weathered everything from the War of 1812 to modern security challenges. The first phase of the crisis had been set in motion by a series of remarks that many Canadians viewed as not just economically ignorant, but fundamentally disrespectful to their national sovereignty. Canada strikes back with economic precision. When the clock struck midnight on February 1, 2025, the economic landscape of North America irrevocably shifted in ways that would have seemed unthinkable just weeks earlier. But Canada's response to Leavitt's comments and the subsequent tariffs demonstrated why many international observers call Canadian diplomacy a masterclass in measured precision, a stark contrast to the brash declarations coming from the White House press room. The methodical nature of Canada's retaliation would prove far more devastating than the blunt instrument approach favored by the Trump administration. The first wave of Canadian retaliation came with surgical precision on March 4, 2025, when Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc announced what would become known throughout Canada as the Great Northern Pushback. The timing wasn't coincidental. Allowing a month of mounting anxiety had created maximum psychological impact. Canada's 25% tariffs on $155 billion worth of U.S. goods didn't merely target economic sectors, they struck at the heart of American consumer culture. The immediate implementation of tariffs on $30 billion worth of products sent shockwaves through American supermarkets and shopping malls, creating immediate and visible consequences that Leavitt's theoretical promises could not match. The strategic brilliance of Canada's approach lay in its meticulous targeting. Orange juice, peanut butter, wine, beer, coffee, cosmetics, and footwear, these weren't industrial inputs or niche products, but the everyday items that fill American breakfast tables and closets. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Each trip to the grocery store or shopping mall became a reminder of the consequences of the trade war. LeBlanc's announcement struck a deliberately measured tone that contrasted sharply with Leavitt's inflammatory rhetoric. Canada is being needlessly and unfairly targeted. Today, the United States has chosen firm in defending our economy. The Canadian approach combined economic retaliation with diplomatic sophistication, ensuring international observers understood Canada was responding, not initiating hostilities. The electricity tariff represented the crown jewel of Canadian retaliation. Ontario's 25% surcharge on electricity exports, generating approximately $300,000 CAD daily, demonstrated Canada's often overlooked leverage over American energy security. The surcharge was elegantly calibrated to maximize impact while maintaining political plausibility. Canada could claim it was merely supporting Ontario workers, families, and businesses, while American households in Minnesota, Michigan, and New York faced rapidly rising electricity bills that couldn't be easily attributed to other factors. The nuclear option that Ontario Premier Doug Ford held in reserve, shutting off electricity entirely, was precisely calculated to create maximum anxiety without immediate implementation.
And the president put out a statement after seeing those comments and said, said that there would be grave consequences imposed on Canada if they think about shutting off electricity for the United States of America and our citizens.
This threat served as both a tactical warning and a strategic reminder of Canadian economic power that American policymakers had long taken for granted. The alcohol industry became another battlefield where Canadian strategy shone. Ford's threat to remove American alcohol from shelves struck at a particularly sensitive American export. As the world's second-largest market for U.S. distilled spirits after Europe, Canada held significant leverage over American bourbon and whiskey producers. The cultural significance wasn't lost on observers. Bourbon, often called America's native spirit, was being held hostage in a trade war initiated by the very administration that claimed to be protecting American interests. The response from the White House press room became increasingly desperate. When questioned about Ontario's electricity threats, Leavitt issued a two-word warning that would become infamous: grave consequences. The vagueness of this threat, combined with her increasingly terse press conference demeanor, suggested the administration was caught off guard by the sophistication and effectiveness of Canada's response. The contrast between her earlier confident predictions and current defensive posturing didn't escape media notice. The political theater reached its dramatic apex during the February hockey game, as Canadian fans booed the U.S. anthem with unprecedented venom, and celebrations erupted throughout Canadian cities following their team's victory. Prime Minister Trudeau delivered his counterpunch on X: "You can't take our country, and you can't take our game." The post, viewed over 4.8 million times, crystallized Canadian national sentiment. This wasn't merely about tariffs anymore. It had evolved into a battle for cultural sovereignty and national dignity. The economic modeling began painting an increasingly dire picture for both nations, though the impacts were asymmetrical. The Bank of Canada's January 2025 Monetary Policy Report presented scenarios that should have given both administrations pause. The U.S. wasn't immune to the economic fallout. The budget lab at Yale projected 1.1 percentage point lower GDP growth and 770,000 jobs lost, figures that made Leavitt's rosy predictions of manufacturing revival increasingly difficult to defend. Her press conferences became exercises in explaining away mounting economic data that contradicted her earlier assertions. Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly's statement captured the national mood with measured fury. Today, the United States has chosen firm in defending our economy. The carefully chosen words, emphasizing that the U.S. had chosen this path while Canada merely defended, maintained the moral high ground internationally while rallying domestic support. As the weeks progressed, the auto industry became ground zero for the trade war's most devastating effects. Stellantis closed its Windsor, Ontario plant for 2 weeks, idling up to 12,000 workers in a single stroke. American forecasts predicted 1.8 million fewer vehicle sales in 2025, with analysts warning of potential market stagnation lasting a decade. For companies like Toyota, producing over 500,000 vehicles annually in Canada, the cost increases approached $5 billion or more, amounts that rendered entire production lines economically unviable. Leavitt's press conferences became increasingly combative as American businesses began feeling the squeeze of supply chain disruptions. Her attempts to paint a picture of manufacturing revival rang hollow as factory closures mounted and companies announced restructuring plans that often involved abandoning North American operations entirely.
As for conversations, there is continued correspondence between the president's team, particularly Secretary Lutnick, and the Canadians as well.
And the market reaction, how do you sell to the American people then after they're looking at what's happening in the markets this week and say that the tariff policy long term is something good?
Her responses grew increasingly detached from economic reality.
It will ensure our national security, and it will boost the morale of the American people to have thriving industries again. Think about Detroit, Michigan.
The invocation of Detroit, a city still struggling to recover from previous economic transitions, seemed particularly tone-deaf as auto manufacturers announced plant closures and layoffs across the Midwest. The international community watched with growing alarm as the trade dispute threatened to metastasize into a broader diplomatic crisis. Mexico joined Canada in retaliatory measures, effectively creating a North American trade war that economists had warned about for years. The USMCA, once heralded as a cornerstone of continental economic integration, was being stress-tested far beyond its designed capacity, its carefully negotiated dispute resolution mechanisms overwhelmed by the scale and scope of the tariff war. As March transitioned to April, the economic damage became impossible to ignore. Canadian support measures, including tax deferrals and financing facilities, reached $40 billion in liquidity for affected businesses. American consumers faced rising prices for basic goods, while manufacturers dependent on Canadian input inputs struggled to maintain operations. The disconnect between Leavitt's theoretical economic models and the visceral reality of supply chain disruption became undeniable. Her public appearances evolved into exercises in damage control that grew more transparent with each passing week.
As for the tariffs, the president made his position on this quite clear with the statement that he put out. And it was a retaliatory statement due to the escalation of rhetoric that we've seen out of Ontario, Canada.
The attempt to frame American tariffs as retaliatory when they were clearly initiated first demonstrated the administration's growing disconnect from reality. The cultural impact deepened as weeks turned to months. Canadian products disappeared from American shelves, while American brands faced hostile consumer reception in Canada. The psychological toll on border communities became particularly acute, with families and businesses that had operated seamlessly across borders for generations suddenly finding themselves caught in the crossfire of a trade war that neither wanted nor understood.
He made that threat. The president saw that and has an obligation and a responsibility to respond accordingly and represent the interests of the American people. So he has made the decision to add a 25% tariff.
The circular logic of responding to threats created by American policies highlighted the administration's inability to break the escalatory cycle. The economic data painted an increasingly grim picture that even Leavitt's most optimistic spin couldn't obscure. Deloitte Insights reported that tariffs were driving inflation higher, potentially slowing Federal Reserve rate cuts and reducing consumer spending growth in 2026. The Tax Foundation estimated a 1.3% long-run GDP reduction, even before accounting for retaliation, projecting revenues of $3.8 trillion over 2025 to 2034 figures that failed to account for the massive economic disruption and consumer costs the tariffs were creating. As Canada's response demonstrated its effectiveness, the administration found itself increasingly isolated. The initial support from some business groups evaporated as the reality of supply chain disruption hit home. Farmers in agricultural states that had previously supported Trump found their Canadian export markets vanishing overnight. The unraveling and uncertain future. The symbolic moment that crystallized the new reality came during a press conference on April 16, 2025, when Leavitt appeared visibly flustered while fielding questions about whether Trump's order to investigate Chris Krebs, who had certified the 2020 election as secure, constituted an abuse of power. Her evasive response, that it was within Trump's authority while avoiding a direct answer, mirrored the administration's broader inability to address the cascading consequences of their trade policies head-on. The parallel crises of domestic political retribution and international economic conflict began to merge in the public consciousness, creating a sense of institutional chaos. The Signal leak scandal of March 26, 2025, when a journalist was accidentally added to a Signal chat discussing military plans, further underscored the administration's operational chaos. Leavitt's refusal to rule out firings and her confirmation that Trump had seen the messages without calling them classified added another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. Some officials privately described Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's messages as reckless and dangerous, highlighting the disorganization within the administration as it grappled with multiple crises simultaneously. The convergence of security breaches and economic warfare created an atmosphere of perpetual crisis that eroded public confidence on both sides of the border. The economic data continued to paint an increasingly catastrophic picture that even the most skilled spin doctors couldn't obscure. Deloitte Insights reported that tariffs were driving inflation higher at a pace that threatened to destabilize monetary policy, potentially slowing Federal Reserve rate cuts that the economy desperately needed and reducing consumer spending growth in 2026 by margins that could trigger a broader recession. The Tax Foundation estimated a 1.3% long-run GDP reduction, even before accounting for retaliation, while projecting revenues of $3.8 trillion over 2025 to 2034, figures that did little to offset the mounting damage to American manufacturers and consumers who faced immediate price increases while the promised tax revenue remained theoretical. Canadian strategic planning intensified as the crisis deepened. Prime Minister Mark Carney, who had taken office amid the crisis, announced an ambitious plan to reduce Canada's dependence on American products and services at speeds we haven't seen in generations. This wasn't merely rhetoric. Canadian businesses began actively pursuing alternative supply chains, forging new trade relationships with European and Asian partners that would outlaw outlast any resolution to the immediate crisis. The economic realignment promised to have generational implications, potentially reshaping North America's economic geography permanently. By April 2025, as Canada's auto industry implemented carve-outs for parts to maintain some semblance of supply chain continuity, it became increasingly clear that traditional trade models no longer applied to this conflict. The integrated North American auto sector, once a model of cross-border cooperation that had survived NAFTA and its replacement, was fracturing along national lines with terrifying speed. For companies straddling the border, the choices were stark and immediate: shut down operations entirely, accept unprecedented cost increases that would ultimately be passed to consumers, or undertake expensive and time-consuming restructuring to relocate production within national boundaries. The automotive crisis deepened dramatically as major manufacturers faced decisions that would reshape the industry. Toyota's annual production of over 500,000 vehicles in Canada faced cost increases approaching $5 billion, forcing the company to consider abandoning its Canadian operations entirely. GM, Ford, and Chrysler announced emergency board meetings to discuss potential closures that could idle hundreds of thousands of workers on both sides of the border. The ripple effects extended through every tier of the automotive supply chain, from seat manufacturers to electronic suppliers, creating an industrial apocalypse in slow motion. Levitt's handling of media relations grew not just combative but borderline hostile to basic journalistic inquiry. Her abrupt ending of a press conference on March 26, 2025, after repeated questions about leaked war plans, became emblematic of her crumbling under pressure, as media outlets increasingly described it. The contrast between her initial confident assertions about tariffs as tax cuts and her later defensive posturing marked not just a dramatic shift in the administration's messaging strategy, but a complete breakdown of coherent policy communication. Veteran Washington observers noted they hadn't seen such a rapid deterioration in White House media relations since the final days of the Nixon administration. The personal toll on Levitt became increasingly visible in public appearances. Her once crisp delivery grew halting and defensive, her trademark confidence replaced by a barely concealed anxiety that cameras captured with unforgiving clarity.
100% tariff on agricultural products from India. Look at Japan tariffing rice, 700%. President Trump believes in reciprocity, and it is about dang time that we have a president who actually looks out for the interests of American businesses and workers.
The increasingly desperate invocation of historical grievances failed to address the immediate crisis unfolding before her eyes. The political implications extended far beyond trade as the crisis metastasized into other areas of policy discourse. During a new media briefing on April 29, 2025, Levitt made waves by claiming Trump was trolling about pursuing a third term in 2028, despite Trump insisting he wasn't joking. The economic suffering extended far beyond government statistics to infiltrate the daily lives of millions of Americans. Consumers discovered firsthand the deceptive nature of Levitt's characterization of tariffs as tax cuts, price increases on 13% of CPI basket items. Goods that comprised U.S. imports hit everything from morning coffee to evening wine with devastating precision. As spring turned to early summer, the Project 2025 controversy continued to dog Levitt with increasing intensity. Her denial that Project 2025 has nothing to do with our campaign rang increasingly hollow as evidence mounted of her deep involvement in the initiative's planning processes. The video titled "The Art of Professionalism" featuring Levitt emerged as a smoking gun that contradicted her public stance, adding to the perception of dishonesty that increasingly characterized her public persona. This additional scandal compounded the economic crisis, creating a perfect storm of credibility issues that made effective crisis management virtually impossible. The international isolation of the United States grew more pronounced as allies distanced themselves from the economic chaos. European Union officials privately expressed shock at the rapid deterioration of the North American alliance, with some German diplomats referring to it as watching a slow-motion car crash in real time. The implications for future NATO cooperation and broader Western alliance structures began to alarm security experts who warned that economic fractures could quickly translate into strategic vulnerabilities. Economic analysts in London and Frankfurt speculated whether the crisis might finally push Canada toward deeper economic integration with Europe, potentially reshaping global trade patterns for decades. Levitt's press conferences evolved into intellectual contortion acts as she attempted to square the circle of economic reality with political messaging. Her rhetorical gymnastics reached their apex when pressed about Ontario's electricity surcharge that was generating $300,000 CAD daily. The president is determined to ensure that we are are depending on American electricity, not the electricity production of foreign nations, including our allies in Canada. The disconnect from reality was staggering. American energy independence through tariffs was proving as logical as trying to run a car on good intentions. By late April, the economic damage transcended mere statistics to become a lived reality for millions on both sides of the border. Steel and aluminum workers who had initially supported the tariffs found themselves facing layoffs as Canadian retaliation decimated export markets. The agricultural sector faced its own crisis as Canadian tariffs on American products decimated traditional export markets. Orange growers in Florida, peanut farmers in Georgia, and coffee roasters across multiple states watched decades of market development evaporate overnight. The irony wasn't lost on observers. The administration claiming to protect American workers was presiding over the destruction of markets that had sustained rural communities for generations. Public trust in the administration's economic competence plummeted to historic lows. Polling data conducted in late April 2025 showed that 68% of Americans believed the tariff policy was hurting rather than helping the economy, with even Trump supporters beginning to question the strategy. Leavitt's public approval ratings as press secretary fell to unprecedented levels, making her increasingly toxic to the administration's broader messaging efforts. Her appearances on cable news became rarer as networks reported viewer fatigue with her obvious evasions and contradictions. The crisis reached a new level of absurdity when Leavitt attempted to claim that economic pain was somehow good for American character. During a May 1st press conference, she suggested that sometimes hardship builds resilience, and the American people are nothing if not resilient. This Marie Antoinette moment drew immediate comparisons to the infamous "let them eat cake" quote, with social media erupting in mockery and disbelief. The tone-deaf response epitomized how disconnected the administration had become from the everyday struggles of American citizens. As May 2025 approached its midpoint, the North American economy faced a bifurcation point, either dramatic policy reversal or acceptance of a new economic reality that separated two nations that had spent generations drawing closer together. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.